American radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. It is Friday, May 10th, 2013. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Pow, Hana Friday, ready for the weekend. Boy, what a week it is. Well, the last 2 weeks it's been. It's just been kind of crazy here. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Sam is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. A couple of program notes. Of course, this being Friday, Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 with her unique perspective on what's been going on. We have already rescheduled Sheriff Richard Mack. We had him on yesterday. A lot of people wrote in very interested in this CSPOA convention that's coming up at the end of the month. And so on May 28th, just before the convention starts, we're going to have Richard Mack back on to talk more and more about constitutionality and taking a peaceful, nonviolent stand against the continued unconstitutional encroachments of the federal government, emphasis on nonviolent and peaceful. Now then, speaking of protests, if you will, Israel's minions are just piling on to Stephen Hawking. And I think they're actually doing themselves a lot more damage. If you go out and you look at Twitter, all of Israel's supporters are out there. They're making fun of his disability. They're making fun of his wheelchair, just all these snarky comments about this stuff. And I don't think they realize that from the point of view of the world's perception, Israel is seen as a big bully, bullying their neighbors, bullying the Palestinians, and now they're bullying a guy in a wheelchair. And it's a public relations disaster, but they just don't seem to see it. ADL is out there condemning Hawking for his support of the aberrant Israel boycott. And, Abe Foxman is out there saying, oh, this was obviously politically motivated. Yeah, that's what Hawking said it was. It was a political decision. He didn't want to support the Israeli apartheid government. And that's really what this is all coming down to. Anybody attacking Stephen Hawking is defending Israel's apartheid policies. And they're just really, really upset because Hawking is a very globally known figure. He's a very famous individual, not only for his work in theoretical physics and cosmology, but because of the heroism of overcoming these incredible physical limitations to do what he has done. And for Israel to just be attacking him, including attacks on his disability, that's not going to play. They don't seem to understand it. These so-called experts in media that control all the media and Hollywood don't really seem to have a grasp on how this looks to the rest of the world here. A lot of other media pundits are observing on it. Glenn Greenwald is out there calling it a knee-jerk reaction to Hawking, as in not very well thought out, and he's certainly accurate about that. Now, we were talking yesterday about this poll over at The Guardian, whether Stephen Hawking was right to boycott Israel over the Palestinians. And I mentioned at that time that Israel's megaphonies were out there trying to basically hijack the vote and shift it over to no. They failed, by the way, huge margin, saying, yes, Hawking was right to boycott Israel, and we're getting more and more confirmation. Israel was rallying their supporters with emails saying, you got to go over here and vote no, you got to do that no. They were just trying to rig this thing, and they still couldn't put it over the top. So they're losing at their own game. They're doing what they've always done to hijack public opinion, and it's an epic, epic fail. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the corporate media is sort of bouncing around between the Ohio kidnapping, the Boston bombing, and they're pretty much concentrating on those two, and they're going on and on about how the prosecutor may bring murder charges against one of the Ohio kidnappers, even though I'm not sure what the rationale for that is, but they're going for the death penalty, and they're all basically trying to act like, we're going to get justice, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And they're acting really tough and butch to basically cover up for the fact that this is an epic fail for the police. And this has got to be a huge embarrassment to the gun grabbers whose whole agenda has been, you can turn over your guns, the government and the police will take care of you. And obviously, as we continue to dig into the reality of the police force in America, that simply doesn't happen. The real police on the streets that you are going to meet as you go about in your daily life are not the swell bunch of heroes Hollywood tells you they are. They just aren't. And all these propaganda shows, reality shows about the police doing this and solving and all the rest of it, the reality is that if you do not already have a criminal record and you go down and you hold up a convenience store in the next town over where nobody knows you, there is a less than 1 in 30 chance you will even be arrested, let alone sent to jail. That's the reality. And as we have pointed out time and time again, Warren versus District of Columbia, the police do not have a legal obligation to protect you from violent crime, but they want you to turn in your guns so you can't protect you from violent crime. And the proper way to be addressing this gun debate right now is, we, the people of the United States of America, under the Second Amendment, have a legitimate right to keep and bear arms equal, if not superior, to those in the hands of the criminals. If the criminals have it, we should be allowed to have it too. That's it. That's all you talk about. Because of this nonsense that we can turn in our guns and the police will protect us, it's absurd. Ohio proves that. The statistics do. Every time there's a gun ban, crime will go up. And the cops won't do anything about it. Now, in our third hour, when Claire joins us, she wants to talk about Syria a lot, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it this first hour, but I do want to hit a couple of high points. Syria has now issued a statement that any further Israeli attacks on their sovereign territory will be responded to immediately. Apparently, Syria's government is getting a lot of pressure from their own people saying, look, you got to respond. Israel's just going to go on bombing until you respond. You might as well do it now and save some real estate and buildings. And, you know, we can't afford to lose any more chicken ranches to these Israeli strikes. And, of course, Israel's all upset because Russia is sending these S-300 air defense missiles to Syria, which will mean the next time Israel flies into Syria, they're probably going to lose more than just 2 jets. Russian President Putin is also issuing a very stark, clear, unambiguous warning to Israel against any more assaults on Syria, saying that Russia will respond if Israel attacks Syria. Russia's trying to calm this whole thing down. Putin's the only adult in the room right now. It's amazing here. Meanwhile, apparently there's a huge problem with members of the so-called Free Syria Army are now defecting from this organized, hired mercenary army because they're apparently not doing very well militarily, and they're all rushing off to join the Islamic fanatics, which is a nightmare for the United States because their goal was to get all these people to go into Syria, overthrow Assad, and then sort of go away and allow the U.S. to put in a U.S. puppet regime. And now it looks like even if the U.S. moves forward with this plan at a coup d'etat, they're going to wind up with a Syrian government that hates the U.S. even more than Assad does. Which is why now they're talking about, well, the U.S. has to go in with a direct invasion, kill everybody, and then put a new government in. It seems to be the new plan here. They just have to figure out how they can get away with it and not wind up in a war with Russia, which would be a bad day for everybody. Israel is already out there talking about having to attack Iran. Iran is back on the table. They're talking about attacking Iran in early 2014. Why are you attacking Iran? Well, just because it's there. We're under an existential threat. And, you know, the usual song and dance that we get. Israel is not under an existential threat. And by the way, Haaretz came out attacking Stephen Hawking on that argument. Hawking doesn't understand. We're under an existential threat. We could be wiped off the face of the earth in a split second if we ever stop being vigilant. And, of course, it's a load of nonsense. Israel is, depending upon who you ask, the world's 5th or 6th most powerful nuclear-armed state. Germany recently confirmed they have known for years that Israel is arming their Dolphin-class submarines with nuclear-tipped cruise missiles. When the apartheid government of South Africa fell, and there's a clue for the apartheid government of Israel, documents surfaced proved Israel was trying to sell clandestine nuclear weapons to other countries. which is the very activity the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is supposed to stop. And obviously, if Israel has enough bombs to sell to other countries, they have a whole pile they're sitting on at home. Israel will not sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty despite repeated requests from the United States and the United Nations. They will not allow IAEA inspections. And yet we're supposed to think Iran is the bad guy for having a power station. Iran has not invaded another country in a war of aggression in over 200 years. Contrast that with Israel that can't seem to go 6 months without attacking one of their neighbors. Meanwhile, right on top of the meeting between Secretary of State John Kerry and Tzipi Livni, Israel has just approved 300 new settlements to be built in the occupied West Bank. They're going on a building spree. Remember last week, and Netanyahu was saying, we're going to freeze the settlement building. And that's when they were trying to make nice with the U.S. because they were hoping the U.S. was going to go launch the war against Syria. And Israel would just simply gather on the border on the Golan with their binoculars and their popcorn and watch more of this war porn, paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. Well, that didn't work out, so now they're launching 300 new settlements. Massive building project, and announcing it right as Kerry meets with Tzipi Livni is a way for Israel to basically flip the bird at the United States government and express their disapproval. We've got a caller on the line, Stephen in California. Aloha, Stephen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I was just wondering how the Russell Trust fits in with the idea that England still owns the United States. Through the City of London, I don't necessarily have to have you address this to me on the phone, but how does it work in with what they're trying to do?
Well, the Russell Trust is an American trust. It was set up by the Russell family, who made their fortune growing opium in the United States and selling it to Britain for Britain to resell in China, which led to a massive war over there. Britain literally fought a war with China over their right to sell heroin to the Chinese people, which ultimately led to the Boxer Rebellion and the collapse of the imperial government and the rise of communism there. As far as Britain owning the United States of America, I don't think they own the U.S. any more than any other nation that has substantial financial investments in this country. We know that London's financial district operates almost as a state within a state, the way the Vatican operates inside Italy, and it's almost completely isolated from the British government itself. And they certainly
it has its own flag.
Yeah, it has its own flag, and they certainly pull a lot of the world's financial strings. But that's more a case of covert and corrupting influence rather than direct ownership. However, we don't know. Remember, back in the 1970s, following the ending of gold convertibility for the Federal Reserve note, Richard Nixon created this whole environmental movement to justify grabbing vast amounts of America's public lands, the lands that in theory belong to the American people collectively, and they walled them all off, supposedly heritage rivers, wilderness zones, roadless areas, and what it really was is the federal government pledged that land as collateral on further U.S. government borrowing. So whoever it is who loaned that money to the U.S. government on that pledged collateral, they're the ones who are basically in physical ownership of the United States, they think, when the U.S. government collapses. Now, my opinion... I'm sorry?
And eminent domain.
Eminent domain is a completely separate principle. That's where the federal government says they have a right to come and take any land that they want. And yes, they've used eminent domain as part of this land grab for the collateralization. Eminent domain has now been used for some very inappropriate purposes, where instead of taking land for public use like highways and stuff, they'll take land away from one user and give it to another citizen who thinks they can generate more tax revenues on it, and that's not what eminent domain was supposed to be. But getting back to this issue about approximately 1/3 of the continental United States has been pledged as collateral on federal government debt. My view would be that because it's not in the Constitution for the government to use public lands as collateral for borrowing, that after the U.S. government collapses and whoever's holding all those bad debts comes in and says, we now own this country, we the American people say, no, we don't. This is all odious debt. It was illegal under U.S. law. None of us agreed to sign over our public lands as collateral on out-of-control government borrowing, especially because it was committed with an act of fraud, the EPA. And because there is a provable act of fraud, we were told the land was being isolated from us for environmental reasons and to protect for the future generations, but it was being used for collateral. So if there's fraud involved, why should we pay the cost for that?
Completely agree.
All right, Stephen, got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Over in Egypt, mass demonstrations and protests all over the place against Israel's attacks against Syria, against renewed Israeli aggression against Al-Aqsa Mosque. IDF went in there and arrested a bunch of the top clergy there, and, of course, the ongoing aggressions against the Palestinians. So they're getting very upset over there at what's going on. I think world opinion is decidedly turning against Israel. They don't know how to deal with that. All the propaganda tricks that they've used for the last 60 years just don't work anymore. Screaming anti-Semite doesn't shut people up any longer. Waving Hitler and Nazis at us doesn't work any longer. Because for most of us, it's all stuff that happened before we were even born. So it's getting a little bit tense. They're not able to adapt to the new reality. They're certainly not willing to perhaps change the way they get along with other nations, which would be the real workable solution. Stop running your country like it's still one of those Old Testament nomadic kingdoms that just gets by smiting everybody left and right. We're waiting for a miracle from the imaginary playmate in the sky here. Now, we have been talking about all these countries the U.S. is involved in militarily, and I was making a joke the other week about I've actually lost count of how many countries the United States has now invaded in terms of its project to force the world back onto Bretton Woods. And somebody else went out, they've been keeping a much better count, over at digitaljournal.com. It turns out the count is right now the United States is involved militarily, directly, or in an advisory capacity in 74 countries. That's 7 with a 4 after it. Apparently the U.S. Central Command is militarily active in 20 countries in the Middle East. Troops on the ground, 20 countries in the Middle East. Yep, it's a world war. We're already there. We haven't had the big bang that will get ordinary people to look up from their America's Idol broadcast and say, oh, wow, it really is a world war. But we're there. U.S. military doctrine is when the U.S. is fighting a multi-front war on 2 continents, it's technically a world war. Coming out of World War II, that was the doctrine for the United States to always be prepared to fight a 2-front war on 2 different continents in the world. And we're already there. 74 countries the U.S. is in, either direct military operations or in some kind of we're advising the government how to put down the people who don't like the fact that their government is buddy-buddy with the United States here. Now, turning over to Benghazi, the corporate media coverage of this is starting to tone down and pull back because it's starting to evolve into a scandal that isn't just going to be targeted on the Republicans or the Democrats, but is going to basically challenge the legitimacy of the entire government. Now, you need to remember, in Washington, D.C., there are 2 kinds of secrets. There are the little secrets, like who's having an affair with who obstructed justice, who was paying or accepting a bribe that can be used to tarnish and destroy a political enemy. But those lies, when they're exposed, they don't threaten the government itself. These are the secrets that are openly used in the media to wage war amongst each other. Politician to politician, party to party. Then there are the big secrets, the ones that are so big if they were ever let out, it would bring the whole system down. And very often, politicians will find their worst enemies helping to support a given cover-up because it would destroy everybody's little golden paycheck and golden parachute here. So we're getting this story here that largely went unreported. Missouri Congresswoman Ann Wagner is basically saying the order to stand down the military forces from supporting Benghazi came right from Barack Obama himself. And as more and more of these facts come out about CIA told to stand down, Special Forces told to stand down, Very much this hands-off, we'll take care of it. It supports my primary theory about what was going on in Benghazi, which was, going into September of last year, the polls were showing Romney slightly ahead of Barack Obama. And Obama had not gotten a huge amount of approval gain over that guy they killed and claimed was Osama bin Laden, because it was pretty obvious it wasn't him. And so Obama needed a new incident, a new October surprise that he could use to make himself look really good and really presidential. Obama wanted a hostage situation that could build up in the media, and the media would make parallels between him and Jimmy Carter. Then he would send in the special forces to rescue the ambassador to prove he wasn't Jimmy Carter. He wasn't going to let it drag on like the Iranian hostage crisis. He was going to look really good and defeat Romney in a landslide. And I think what happened is, when the unit that was playing at being the Al-Qaeda terrorists started shooting and making a ruckus around the Benghazi mission, all of the Libyans living around there heard the gunfire and just spontaneously rose up to join in. Remember how after Benghazi happened, there were spontaneous riots all across the Middle East? It just shows everybody was ready to go. Very little provocation. They're going to be in the streets. And I think that's what happened in Benghazi. And so this carefully stage-managed piece of theater to kidnap the ambassador turned into an uncontrolled riot. The ambassador was killed. Obama's public relations stunt turned into an epic fail. Now they're trying to cover it up. Welcome back to the show. And I want to get over to the Boston bombing. Tamerlan has finally been laid to rest amidst all this furor about where he was going to be buried, which is, it's not like Tamerlan's really going to care. He's past caring where his remains are winding up. When I die, I want my body donated to science, because medical students can always use a good laugh. And now, of course, we're getting to the situation where Congress is now going to hold hearings on what went wrong in Boston. And I think the Congress is responding to the issues that have been raised here in the free media, that the fact that Boston actually happened. If you accept the official story at face value, and I don't, if you hadn't picked up on that yet, but if you accept the official story, then the fact that the Boston bombing actually happened proves the Department of Homeland Security doesn't work. TSA doesn't work. The FBI doesn't work. The CIA doesn't work. Boston represented an epic fail for this security industrial complex we have all had to endure going back over the last 10 years. The crotch groping, the luggage looting, the various ban and no-fly and suspect lists that are used to destroy the lives of innocent people. None of it worked. And if our government is really so short of money that they can't repair the roads, let's start firing all of these agencies who obviously cannot do what they claim to do in exchange for their taxpayer funding. Of course, we know all the Congress is going to do is say, well, you know, we need to do better, and we need to give them more money, and we need to pass more laws allowing them to look at everybody's life. In other words, the classic definition of insanity. What they've been doing up to now didn't work. Let's just do more of it. That's what they're going to try and sell you. And of course, the next time there's another terror attack, whether real, which I doubt, or staged, which is most likely, Congress will harumph and say, well, we have to do even more. And that's how they sell you the tyrannical state. Create an act of terror and say, oh, because of this, we must take away more of your rights and liberties. Most Americans have already hit the wall on that one. The polls that were being run right after Boston said the majority of Americans said, no, you can't have any more of our civil rights. We'll deal with the threat of terror. And remember, the threat of terror isn't really all that big. You're far more likely to be killed by your pharmacist or your doctor or by a drunk driver than you are by a terrorist. When you look at the disparity in death rates that we've been talking about related to the gun grab, about how few people are actually killed with assault rifles compared to those who die from mistakes made by their doctors. And people killed by terrorists are even smaller than those who are killed by assault rifles. They're trying to make it into a big issue to justify taking away your freedoms. You're more likely to win the Publishers Clearinghouse than be killed by a terrorist. But it has come out now. Remember all those fusion centers, huge, expensive, costly buildings full of computers and people that were situated at key points all across the United States of America that were violating the Fourth Amendment, prying into all your information, and the idea was they're going to take all this data and they were going to correlate it and come up with something meaningful with which to prevent acts of terror. Obviously, Boston proves they didn't work as well. Now we're getting this story coming out of TechDirt.com that the FBI, which is claiming they received a warning about Tamerlan Tsarnaev from the Russians, didn't forward that information on to the fusion centers. And I'm sure the Congress will say, well, it was obviously a failure in communication and we need more communication, blah, 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 blah. What you need, if you really had a need for this kind of a system in the United States, you need to stop having it in so many different pieces fighting over their turf. That's part of the problem. That's part of where the confusion comes from. You've got all these little independent fusion centers and all these little independent agencies, and they're all fighting over information, and they're not willing to share because they have the advantage, they know this, and the other guy doesn't. It's politics. It's turf. And that's what they really think about, building their turf so they can ask for more money, so they can have more bonuses. It's all driven by the money and the funding. But it's just a reminder again. All of this stuff, FBI, fusion centers, it didn't work. If we accept the story of the Boston bombing at face value as the government is shoveling it at us, what it tells us is all of the security industrial complex doesn't work. Just like the Ohio kidnappings proved the police don't work. The police are kicking down doors from people who are hydroponically growing vegetables in their basement, and they ignore the man who's got a naked girl crawling around the backyard on a leash. It's amazing here. Now, interesting little story. In the newly revised National Defense Authorization Act, the 2013 version, buried in there and virtually ignored by the corporate media, was an amendment that officially allows the United States government to create and distribute propaganda within the borders of the United States of America, like they haven't been doing it all along. But the NDAA makes it official and legal, so when you point out and say the government and the corporate media are propagandizing the people, they can say, well, that's the law now. We're allowed to do that. And so now it's legal. We can't complain about it, but we can go on to point it out and say, yeah. And I don't think the government realizes, again, because politics is perception, I don't think they realize that in basically coding this into the law, they're basically announcing to the entire American people that anything coming out of the government and the corporate media can't be trusted. It is very likely propaganda. Iran wants to wipe Israel off the map. Arabs did 9/11. Al-Qaeda, blah, blah, blah. And they have been doing it all along. There's no question about it. Now they just want to make it legal so people can't embarrass them by taking them to court and say, you're lying to us. Because now they can say, yeah, that's our job. That's what the law says we're supposed to do. Remember that Fox synthetic bovine growth hormone lawsuit where the courts basically said there is no law requiring the corporate media to tell you the truth about anything. The owners of the corporate media can order their prostitutes to lie to you, and if the prostitutes refuse to lie to you, they can be fired legally for cause. And they don't want to lose their jobs. Next job down from corporate media is working over at the fast food restaurants. And McDonald's requires a 4-year degree for that, so most of these corporate media people aren't even going to qualify for that. And so, unfortunately, sadly, tragically, and history will bear this out, the prostitutes of the corporate media will lie to us if that's what they're told to do, because they want to keep their jobs and they want to have their little makeup and hairstylists and their time on the camera. Like that stupid stunt that CNN pulled with these two reporters standing in the same parking lot, and they faked a satellite link-up to make it look like they were separated apart, and CNN's technical wizardry was saving the day. Now, interestingly enough, there's an interesting story over at johnfriend.net, headlined, Are Conspiracy Theories Gaining Traction? And I wish he wouldn't use that phrase, because it has become such a pejorative. Oh, it's a conspiracy theory. There are conspiracies. It's even in the Bible. I think it's what is it, Elijah 20, 22, or 25? They talk about conspiracies to deceive. They are out there. But the whole point of this article is that more and more Americans are turning away from the official story about everything, and they are open to hearing alternative explanations for what's been going on with history. And it is a reminder, one of the best things you can do to support WhatReallyHappened.com and Republic Broadcasting, we know those Americans are out there who don't trust the official story any longer. They're asking questions. And we need you to lead them to us where their questions can be answered, where they can find out that the reason for all of these wars has nothing to do with Muslims hating us for our freedoms and everything to do with propping up the Federal Reserve note, returning the world to Bretton Woods, dollariferizing all of the world's resource-rich areas. People are responding to that. Trust in the official story is at an all-time low. And if the government is dealing, and the fact that the government is coming out now and saying we have to have the legal authority to propagandize the American people, it's basically an admission that they've lost control of the narrative here. Speaking of U.S. government, USDA choice bovine excrement, apparently President Obama is out there declaring the economy is poised for progress. It's the latest euphemism. Green shoots, light at the end of the tunnel, almost at a turnaround, poised for progress. What he's basically saying is it's continuing to go downhill, but have patience, don't revolt, don't rebel, don't kick us out of our cushy jobs. It is going to get better somewhere down the road. But they've been saying that for what, 10 years now? My goodness here. Over in Japan, they had a major upset. The Japanese government bonds plunged and hit what's called the limit down. Now, in order to prevent runaway stock market runs, many stock exchanges around the world, including those in New York and Chicago and obviously in Japan, if there is a drop that hits a certain limit, trading is halted to give everybody a chance to take a deep breath and calm down and maybe keep the panic under control. And Japanese government bonds hit that limit down. And apparently it was the worst day for the government bonds in the last 5 years. So it's all going down together at the same time. And you know why? Because every one of these nations in economic trouble, drowning in debt, are enslaved to a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. Where, oh where, is the national leader with the courage to stand up and point the finger of blame where the finger of blame rightly should be pointed? We're going to go to the phones here. Rick in Florida. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I'm a huge fan of the show to the point where I've taken your webpage and put it as my signature on my email to get the word out about you.
Well, thank you very much. That always helps.
I'm in the process of having one of my nephews is about to do a school paper on the Currency Act.
Yes.
And I don't know where to research. And if you could you give me a brief synopsis of just prior to the Currency Act, what the colonies were like and what caused this to come about and what the gist of the result was. I guess maybe, so how would I explain it to a third party because it's such an important event?
Well, you know, it's rather reassuring. We're seeing a lot of young people now start to go out and read about the Currency Act as the cause of the American Revolution. In fact, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, these two high schoolers did a video about it, a very nice video expose. But in short, before the American Revolution, Ben Franklin was the colonists' ambassador to Great Britain, and when he was over there talking with the British court, he got to see the horrible poverty that was gripping England at the time as a result of the Bank of England. Massive unemployment, massive hunger, massive... if you've ever read the works of Charles Dickens, or if you study what the East End was like about the time of Jack the Ripper, that was kind of what was going on. And the people in the court were asking Ben Franklin what the colonies were doing about their unemployed and their hungry and homeless. And Ben Franklin says, we don't have any. And they go, what? And he says, well, you know, we're printing our own money. The colonial governments are printing our own money. We always make sure there's enough money flowing through commerce for everybody to have a job and everybody to be prosperous. And when the Bank of England got wind of that, they went into a panic because the last thing they needed was to see, the American colonies with state-issued value-based currency and the people prospering, because it was going to give the British people bad ideas about maybe wanting to do exactly the same thing. So they lobbied King George III to pass the Currency Act, which ordered everybody in the colonies to conduct their business only using banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England. And within the space of just a couple of years, the colonies were plunged into exactly the same poverty and privation and joblessness and hunger that England itself was involved with. And that was what really fueled the anger for the American Revolution. If you go back and you read the writings of Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, and they say right in there, it was the Currency Act that led to the American Revolution. So we fought a revolution to break free of private central banking. We set up the U.S. Treasury, which created all the currency, spent it into circulation to buy what the government needed. The currency flowed through circulation, powering commerce without accruing interest to a private bank, and then was taxed back at the same amount to close the cycle and balance the books. And it worked very well, and that's why the United States was this economic and industrial powerhouse during its early years. Because nations with private central banks cannot compete with nations that are free from private central banks. So the private central bankers, having lost the revolution, they came in and tried to set up a private central bank with their agent in place, Alexander Hamilton. And they created the first bank of the United States. It had a 20-year charter. And at the end of that 20 years, the United States was back into that same banker-imposed hunger, poverty, starvation, massive joblessness. And the bankers were getting rich off of all of this. So Congress voted not to renew the charter for the first Bank of the United States. This was in 1811. And the Rothschilds literally came in and threatened the United States Congress, if you do not renew our banking charter, we will arrange a war for you. And Congress said no. And so the Rothschild Bank of England went to the British Crown and said, if you want to recolonize the Americas, we'll loan you the money to do it at very, very low interest rates. Britain said, yeah, great idea. And the next thing you know, you got the War of 1812. Now, the U.S. won the War of 1812, but it put the United States into such dire economic straits, they were forced to charter a new central bank, which was called the Second Bank of the United States, also with a 20-year charter. And at the end of that 20 years, once again, the American people were suffering hunger, joblessness, starvation, and the bankers were getting insanely rich. And Andrew Jackson made it the flagship, if you will, of his second term in office to shut down the bank. And he succeeded in doing so, whereupon there was an immediate attempt to assassinate him. And so basically that's what the Currency Act was. What we're looking at is all of history is a war between banking systems, between these predatory, privately owned banks who want to take the public currency away from being a public utility and turn it into just another profit-making scheme for the bankers. And it is a failed system because inevitably these private central banks create more debt than money to pay the debt, and everybody gets trapped in the debt. You can't have private central banking without it resulting in homelessness, joblessness, and hunger. It's impossible because there isn't enough money out there to pay all the debt. And that's really what it comes down to. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Glenn in Philadelphia, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Mike, you were talking about the fusion centers. One of the reasons they're having trouble with coordinating things, they tried to save money when they deployed by making them cold fusion centers. And it's just not working for some reason.
I thought you were going to tell me that they were using Vista or Windows 8, which is equally destructive.
Oh, no. I don't know how you can say that. Well, I watch NCIS, Mike, and I watch James Bond movies, and I see them sliding around those little the screens like sheets of paper and everything.
Yeah.
They can watch anybody, anytime, at any given moment. They know everything. They're practically omniscient. I mean, when I'm in the shower, I'm afraid to wash my hair because I'm afraid I might open my eyes and find someone standing there.
Well, it all depends on how hot she is, whether that's a problem or not.
Yeah, it's like I always feel like somebody's watching me, But there's a song like that, you know.
Let me tell you where I think all of this stuff is going. And again, Boston, if you accept the official story, proves none of this stuff is really working. I think the idea is they're out there trying to claim that they're scanning all your emails and listening to all your phone calls and reading all of your computer equipment. It's a gigantic bluff to scare you into staying silent, to keep you from talking with each other, to keep you dependent on the corporate media for your daily dose of what you are supposed to be thinking today. And it is a gigantic bluff, because even if they are, in fact, storing and monitoring all of your Facebook and MySpace, if they're even still in business, all of your text messages and emails and phone calls, it's a huge amount of data, much of it unreliable. People lie on Facebook, especially if they're trying to find somebody to go on a date with. So it's an unreliable source. And while the acquisition of this data from 330 million Americans every single day is a linearly additive, the correlation between these data points is what's called an unlimited expansion. There is simply too much data to try and sift through and get anything meaningful, especially with so much of this data erroneous, misattributed. There are computer errors and software errors. And like I said, on social media, people like to brag. They're saying things that aren't exactly 100% accurate. And that's why this whole thing was just a complete joke from the beginning. And again, if you accept the official story of Boston, obviously none of it worked. They're all trying to claim, oh, they knew it was coming, but yet they still let it happen.
Well, when the omniscience thing will be a lot more believable when SWAT teams start going to the right addresses more often.
That would be a good place to start, you know.
Oops. Domino's has a better average at the moment. But,
that's a good one.
But one other thing I wanted to point out about, you talk about people being unaware of what's going on militarily in the World War and stuff. I think one of the most successful military policies in decades since I was a kid was the implementation of the all-volunteer force. The elimination of the draft got people to not care about it because their kid wasn't likely to be drafted. So. Okay, we got to take a break for station identification. Thank you for the call. Back with more calls after America. Welcome back to the show here. And before I go back to the phone here, quick story. Up in Buena Vista, Michigan, the school district has gone completely broke and has had to let all the teachers go. So I guess it's a school holiday. Of course, it's only a few more weeks till summer vacation anyway. But back to the phones. We're going to go to Frank in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, Michael. Thank you for taking my call. You know, I heard you talking about the War of 1812 and the banking system. There's a piece of information that people might not be aware of. The Prime Minister of England was called a man, Spencer Percyville, and he was a very good man. He was a righteous man, and he was against going to war with the United States. He knew it was a banking war. And in May of 1812, he was assassinated, the only prime minister ever to be assassinated. And once he was assassinated, you can line up the dates, war was declared on the United States. So there were people even on the opposite side of the ocean that was against going to war, but it always seemed that they ended their demise with either bullets or they were taken out of office somehow, and I'd just like you to give that piece of information.
That is an interesting piece of information. I'm going to add it to that article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. As I mentioned before, when Andrew Jackson succeeded in shutting down the Second Bank of the United States, there was an immediate assassination attempt on his life, which failed when both pistols used by the assassin malfunctioned. When Abraham Lincoln found himself going into having to deal with the secession of the Confederacy, the bankers were willing to finance his war at like 30% interest, and Lincoln said, I'm not going to enslave the white people to the banks to free the black people. So he exercised his authority as President of the United States, and he issued his own money, the greenback. And it worked so well that once the war was over, Lincoln said, we're going to keep on doing this. And, of course, then John Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln. And as soon as Lincoln was dead, the greenbacks were taken out of circulation and destroyed. Then you had John F. Kennedy, who issued Executive Order 11110 that put a new U.S. government-issued currency, the United States note, into circulation, backed by the silver that was in Fort Knox at the time, about $4.5 billion worth of currency floating through circulation on which interest was not accruing to the Federal Reserve. 5 months later, Kennedy was assassinated. The United States notes were taken out of circulation and almost all of them destroyed. There are still examples of them in collectors' hands right now. And on the Warren Commission sat John J. McCloy, president of the Chase Manhattan Bank, president of the World Bank, and I don't care how good a banker he is, he has no business being on a committee that's supposed to be investigating the murder of the president, unless he was there to make sure the financial dimensions never surfaced.
Mike, you're absolutely right. It's out in plain sight. A high school student could connect the dots. Every time anybody got close, their demise was either met with bullets or they were taken out of office. And the last, I can say, is also Ronald Reagan in 1980 when he was campaigning. Remember, he was campaigning also against the Fed, and he wanted to reveal the Federal Reserve member banks. And he almost met his demise with an assassination attempt. So it seems anybody that was for changing our currency to the actual constitutional lawful money of gold and silver always meant a horrible demise. But it also happened on the other side of the ocean. I appreciate you putting up that stuff about Spencer Percyville. He was a righteous man. He was a good man. I have an autobiography actually a biography that was wrote on him, and I believe that he knew exactly that we were going to get into another bankers' war, and he was dead set against sending young men to die in another banker war.
All righty. Well, I will look that up, and it is an important thing to add to that, all wars are bankers' wars, because once you make that paradigm shift and understand these private central banks are willing to lie, cheat, steal, kill, and start wars to keep their scam going, then all of a sudden all of American history makes a great deal more sense. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. When we come back, we got another caller waiting on the line. America, welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Bobby in California. Aloha, Bobby. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. Listen, it's been a few minutes on this. I'm on hold here, which is fine. But I'm a little confused here. I haven't heard you or anyone, unless I'm wrong, talk bad about the Jews.
Well, you're a newcomer to the show, aren't you? I mean, we don't talk.
Actually,
we obviously we're very critical of the actions of the Israeli government, and I routinely chastise the money junkies who spread across all races, religions, colors, and creeds. And that's going to have to do. And if you need a show where somebody's going to be hitting your niche market, you need to go to some other network, I think.
Oh, okay, but I mean, are you against the Jew-hating talk, or are you for that?
I don't see much validity in it. It only fuels Israel's propaganda machine. I'd rather deal with the actions of individuals. And, I don't hold the world's Jewish people responsible for the actions of the government of Israel any more than I hold all of the American people responsible for the actions of CIA, any more than I hold all of the world's Muslims responsible for the actions of Al-Qaeda, whoever they ultimately turned out to be.
Well, so can I ask you, when it comes to the people who say the Jews are responsible for every war pretty much, and they influence all the media pretty much, the bank,
I generally, I don't. Basically, again, I view it as part of Israel's propaganda, because Israel tries to defend its aggressions by blurring the line between the government of Israel and the world's Jewish people. And they're always saying, oh, you're just being...
Then may I ask, if you don't agree with that, why are you on a Jew-hating network?
You know something? I think we're going to let you go here because you seem to be in here to try and push a propaganda point. And we're going to switch over to Tim in Texas. Aloha, Tim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, sir. Yes, I just wanted to make a point and then ask a question. Now, obviously, all of this with the international bankers, they have a means to an end, which is, of course, a world government. They want to rule the whole world instead of just,
most
countries.
Of it.
Right. Well, is it true? I've been reading William F. Jasper's book about how Kennedy signed the bill in '61 to disarm, and we're in like stage 2 right now. But anyway, is it true that when we disarm and our missiles and our military, is it true that we're actually just handing our missiles to the UN, or are we disarming and destroying our military weapons?
That is kind of a complex issue. Under various treaties, weapons, and we're talking mostly about the strategic weapons. I'll give you a good example. When the SALT Treaty was ratified, it placed a limit on how many of these nuclear ballistic missile capable submarines the U.S. Navy was allowed to have. And so what they did is they took some of the older submarines. They did not destroy them. They did not scrap them. They did not give them away or sell them. All they did was change the armament. They took out the nuclear ballistic missiles and they put in these multi-cell Tomahawk missile launchers. They renamed these the Arsenal ships. And they're technically not nuclear ballistic missile submarines, but they're still out there and still being used. And, of course, in a crunch, those Tomahawk land attack missiles can be given nuclear warheads. So everybody sort of like fudges the requirements on these various treaty requirements. The U.S. government obviously will get rid of old systems that are too expensive to maintain and not effective. One of the common tricks they like to do is buy a whole bunch of military hardware that sits there doing absolutely nothing. It's essentially brand new. The Congress will then declare it surplus, and it gets sold to Israel for pennies on the dollar. It's another way that our government is basically shoveling your money covertly at Israel. As far as the UN taking direct military control of U.S. weapons systems, I don't see that happening. Control tends to be passed more toward NATO, and of course we are now very alarmed by the fact that Israel is now directly in the command and control link for America's nuclear arsenal as well.
Okay, NATO. I'm kind of confused. The difference isn't NATO the military force of UN?
Actually, NATO was originally started as a separate organization, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was sort of basically to deal with the post-World War II environment of the war between the West and the then Soviet Union, and so its scope was limited. The United Nations was founded to basically try and be a peacekeeper around the entire globe, everywhere. NATO, administratively, if you will, is a subset. But NATO has gone more to the military enforcement direction, while the United Nations, at least nominally, tries to maintain the image of being a discussion and negotiating and peacekeeping body. And most times when the United Nations sends peacekeepers into other countries, they are basically soldiers loaned to them either from NATO or the United States, and they just change the patches on the uniform and go in and do whatever they're supposed to do.
Right. Well, obviously, I believe their end game is the UN. I mean, the whole reason the UN was started was, yes, to appear to be for peace, but I mean, really just incrementally and slowly hand over our sovereignty. But I believe the end game of the UN and the people behind it is to slowly and incrementally weaken our military and our, our weapons, and give it to them to where when we finally see and come to light, what's going on, we're going to be too weak to even fight back against them. That's probably the end game, isn't it?
I think
in the future,
the United Nations and the United States understand that an actual military conflict between the two, first of all, the UN's main building is right there in New York City, and one missile strike and it's gone. There is no question that the United Nations is pushing for a global government. There is no question that the United States sees it as the UN's primary enforcer for that eventual global government, and I think they're more partners in this plan than opponents.
Okay.
Okay? All righty.
Thank you.
You got it, and we're just going to switch over to Chuck in Texas. Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I wanted to get your opinion on Jan Brewer and this militia that she's supposedly setting up in Arizona. This is the same woman who just vetoed the silver for being legal currency, and she has not been any kind of constitutionalist. I think the Arizonans are being set up. I would no more put my name on her list than I would Homeland Security's voluntarily, although I'm sure I'm there already. What do you think? Yeah,
the instant you called this show, you went on the list over at the Department of Homeland Security. Yeah, I agree with you, and I was going to get into this a little bit later, but this Adam Kokesh stunt for the 4th of July is getting a lot of corporate media coverage. He was apparently on CBS in Washington, D.C. talking about this. And again, it's telegraphing this is a setup. The United States federal government is preparing to go to war against the 50 states. In the court of world opinion, the side that starts shooting first will lose. The federal government is desperate for there to be some kind of a violent uprising among the American people that they can crush down with all of this hollow point ammunition and armored vehicles and drones and everything else they've been spending your money on for the last several years. And if they can't provoke the American people into a genuine act of rebellion, they're just going to set one up. And I think this Adam Kokesh stunt in D.C. is plan A, and I think Jan Brewer's militia may be a plan B, where the U.S. government, the federal government, is trying to force a confrontation. And if they can get into an armed, violent confrontation, unfortunately, the federal government's going to win that one. And that's why I keep saying, do not initiate violence against the government. Prudence demands you be prepared to defend yourself and your home and your family when the government initiates violence against you. But at this point, I still think they can't hold this Ponzi scheme economy together much longer. And that's why they're so desperate to start all these wars and desperate to try and get rid of the Constitution, because if the economy collapses and they don't have somebody to blame it on, we, the American people, are going to point the finger of blame at the author of all of this misery for the last century, the Federal Reserve System.
Well, I would suggest that people in Arizona not put their name on Jan Brewer's list.
I would agree. I would agree.
All right, buddy.
All right.
Talk to you later.
I don't know why Jan Brewer needs a militia, because technically every state is entitled to have their own National Guard, which is answerable to the governor. And I know during the Los Angeles riots, Operation Garden Plot and Cable Splice, part of the agenda was to federalize the National Guard and place them under Washington, D.C.'s control. But a state governor at any point can go to the commander of the National Guard and say, you answer to me now. And if that commander refuses, well, you just fire them right then and there and look at the subordinate and say, are you going to take orders from me? And the first one that says yes gets that top job. So I don't know why Jan Brewer is setting up this whole new militia thing. And remember, in the 1990s, all of these militias that were being set up across the country did turn out to be government operations. And they would get a bunch of guys together with guns and go out in the woods and play at being soldier. And then the FBI informant that set them up would get them to do an act of violence so that the media could say, oh, these darn patriots and militias, they're a danger. And, of course, we saw a lot of that propaganda associated with the bombing of the Murrah building in Oklahoma City. The government needs enemies to scare you with, even if they have to create those enemies themselves, which seems to be 99% of the time. Alrighty, the phone lines are clear. We're going to take another commercial break. When we come back, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the economy and how the biggest bank robber in the world is the bank. America, welcome back to the show. We got some callers on the line right now. Tom in Minnesota. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. Excuse me, find my voice there. Yeah, just where you talk about the National Guard being under the governor. Our Minnesota governor, Rudy Perpich, back when they were sending our troops to South America to build roads they were getting shot at, he didn't like that, said they couldn't do that. Perpich reversed the Department of Defense. He took it to the United States Supreme Court, and they said that the Congress of the United States may authorize members of the National Guard of the United States to be ordered to active federal duty for purposes of training outside the United States without either the consent of a state governor or the declaration of a national emergency. So in essence, what they're saying, and same as you look at the National Guard going to Iraq and Afghanistan, they're regular army.
Well, that's certainly the way the federal government treats them. But again, the National Guard was originally intended to be the army of the separate states' governors, and I think the governors need to reassert that. It's all going to come down to when we see Washington, D.C. launch their war against the independent states. It's going to come down to what the commanders of those state guards, which side they're going to come down on, and the governor's going to have to make some choices. Unfortunately, sadly, too many of our state governors see their position as merely a stepping stone to making the big promotion to Washington, D.C. And as we look at all the history of the ways our system of government was changed very subtly, originally senators were supposed to be appointed by the state government. That gave the state government tremendous influence in setting national policy. But when the senators were broken free and made elected offices, it basically, that was a major time where the state governments lost a great deal of their influence over Washington, D.C. You should go back and look at some of those amendments that were passed right after the end of the Civil War, where the states were no... Well, I was thinking more along the one about that said that the validity of the national government debt may never be questioned. And that's such a bizarre idea that we, the people, and the states of this country can't question why the federal government is borrowing all this money and sticking us with the payments. And that was probably one of the biggest blows against the freedom and independence of the American people that we saw come down the line. And again, it was from the bankers. Because once the bankers said, hey, the federal government doesn't have to answer to the people in the states for money they borrow, they're going to start borrowing more money and we'll make more profit.
Yep, and what's interesting, too, the Minnesota Constitution says that except in time of war or insurrection or emergency or something, there can be no standing army in the state of Minnesota. So we have a National Guard bases here. If they're technically under the president, according to the Minnesota Constitution, they shouldn't be allowed to be in the state of Minnesota.
Well, unfortunately, the federal government, first of all, the federal government isn't even following its own constitution and has zero respect for the constitutions of the states at this point. Right. Okay?
Also, it's interesting, the Minnesota Constitution has I forget the difference there, fee simple and the loyal titles, the one where you actually own the land. The Minnesota Constitution actually says that we own our property and it's not fee simple. I believe it's a loyal. And again, that's ignored too.
Well, you know, we're coming up on this crisis, and we're seeing it start with Kansas and all these states that are passing laws to block further federal gun laws, to block NDAA, to block Obamacare, and we're coming up to a crisis where the federal government is going to say, look, you do what we tell you to do, or we will send the Army into your state. They're looking for a reason to literally declare war on the 50 states, and that's where they're headed right now. Thank you very much for the call, Tom. We're going to switch over to Zach in Maryland. Aloha, Zach. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I just wanted to comment about the National Guard. And my brother was a full-time National Guard here in Maryland back in the 80s and into the 90s. And the National Guards, the 50 National Guards of all the different states are actually federal agencies. And during peacetime, they are given, the control of them are given to the governors of each state. But they are part of the Army, and the Air National Guards are part of the Air Force, and they can be taken away for federal duty at any time for any reason for federal service. Now, what happened was, up to the presidency of Theodore Roosevelt, there was no such thing as a National Guard. They were called the state militia.
Yes.
And control was transferred through, through some kind of finagling, the way they do it. But I know control was transferred from the states, and the funding was transferred.
That actually happened in the run-up to World War I, and I know this because this is family history. My grandfather had been part of what was then called the New Hampshire State Guard, and they became the first unit mobilized for the Yankee Division of World War I. And control was passed from the governor of New Hampshire to the War Department. And but then after the war, these state guards were supposed to go back to the states, and it stayed that way until the Rodney King riots, which is when supposedly permanent control of the state guards was transferred to the federal government. And that was just another way of weakening the state governments and taking away their ability to defend themselves against federal encroachment. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Zach, and we'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show here, and I want to talk a little bit more about the economy. And the reality is, despite all of the corporate media pronouncements and Obama's new statement that we're on the verge of progress, the reality is that when you have a nation that is enslaved to a private central bank issuing all of the public currency as a loan at interest, debt always grows faster than the available money supply, and it is never any other way. And at this point, the United States government is hopelessly in debt. They can't even make the interest payments The U.S. government right now is having to borrow 46 cents of every dollar it is spending on these wars, on Israel, on the Department of Homeland Security, on the TSA, on the FBI, on fusion centers, on crotch gropers at the airport. And they're being kited along by the Federal Reserve that is simply creating currency out of thin air, most of which is going to Wall Street, so we're not quite seeing the hyperinflationary effects that typified Weimar Germany, the Weimar Republic in Germany, and what we have here down in Zimbabwe, where people are walking around with notes that say $100 trillion. But it has to start hitting eventually. And Wall Street's simply using all this instantly created money to play games with the stock market. Supply and demand, run it up in value, sell it out, put money in their pocket. They're reaping huge personal fortunes for which nothing of any value is returned to the economy or our nation as a whole. They're just gaming the systems. And the banks are now robbing their own depositors. We saw that in Cyprus. They're clearly getting ready to do that in Canada. When they reach that point where the banks can only be kept solvent by literally stealing the money of their own depositors, you know it's on the edge of collapse. And this is the reason the federal government is desperate to get a world war going, or desperate to get some kind of a violent uprising in the United States with which they can suspend the Constitution, declare a national emergency, and martial law. Because everybody inside Washington, D.C., and everybody on Wall Street knows if the economy implodes first, 330 million Americans are going to stand up and they're going to point the finger of blame exactly where that finger of blame deserves to be. Private central banking issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. The public currency not as a public utility, but as just another private money-making venture. We're going to grab another phone call here. Richard in Texas. Aloha, Richard. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. Mr. Rivera, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Mr. Rivera, I'd like to ask you regarding the banking, why are you on a Jew-hating network?
Oh, come on. Drop this guy. Boy, you know something? Somebody is really getting scared. We got two of these calling in with this, oh, you're just a bunch of Jew haters. Doesn't that tell you how scared they all are? We've been having DOS attacks on our server all week long. Man, these guys might as well put a flashing neon sign on their forehead saying it's all coming apart and we don't know how to stop it. So we're just going to start screaming Jew hater at everybody. That's what these calls mean. They're losing it. They're losing control of the narrative. The American people, the people of the world, are waking up to this private central banking scam. And they don't know how to stop it. They don't know how to put us all back to sleep. That's why we're getting all these phone calls, guys calling us, oh, you're a bunch of Jew haters, you're a bunch of anti-Semites, Hitler, 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 Nazi, Nazi, Nazi. They're afraid. They're afraid that you are awake, that you see what is the real cause of America's history of war going back 200 years. And it all goes back to the money junkies. And the money junkies are very upset about that. They don't want you knowing it's all they're doing for profit. They want you to go on believing the Muslims hate us for our freedoms. They want you to go on believing all these little fairy tales that they have been feeding you every day of your life to obfuscate what's really driving world events. The greed of the money junkies. And history has shown these money junkies have no morals, no ethics. They're quite inhuman in their greed, like any other addict. We've all seen people who are addicted to alcohol or cocaine or heroin or meth or whatever else is out there, and they reach a point where the need to feed that addiction is so great, they don't care how they harm their families around them or their communities around them or the world around them. And the money addicts are no different. As long as they get a big pile of wealth to roll around on and have orgasms, as long as they've got $100,000 wristwatches on their hands and drive $3 million cars, they don't care what happens to the rest of the world. And I'll tell you why that's built into the system. We know that over time, under private central banking, the amount of currency available to the general public gets smaller and smaller and smaller, even as the debt continues to grow, because more of the newly created money is simply immediately absorbed by the bankers to pay the interest on the old money. And less actually gets into the popular commerce. And that's why jobs vanish and homes vanish. And when you get to that state, it doesn't matter how hard you're willing to work. There are no jobs, and you will be homeless and hungry. It is an inevitable aspect of this model of national economics. And the people who are profiting from this system don't care that their system of banking creates hunger and homelessness. It's just a cost of doing business. It's not their problem. And if they have to settle the books by going to war, they have cheerfully done it before. War of 1812, Civil War, World War I, World War II, now heading into World War III to just prop up that ink and paper. These money junkies will gladly send hundreds of millions of human beings to painful death and dismemberment, and it's just a cost of doing business to keep this scam going a little bit longer. And now you know that's what the scam has been. And now they know, you know, which is why we're getting these bogus phone calls screaming, "Oh, you're just a Jew hater. Did I mention Hitler? If I didn't, Hitler. They're afraid. That's what these phone calls are telling us. They're in a panic. All the old tricks and illusions that worked to keep them in wealth and power and to keep you blinded don't work anymore. The world has changed around them, and they don't know what to do about it. This attack on Stephen Hawking has backflashed on them. Now Israel is seen as a bully, not just against its neighboring nations, not just against the Palestinians, but now they're bullying a guy in a wheelchair. Going to go to the phones here. Danny in South Carolina, and I hope you're not calling in to talk about Hitler and the Nazis or something like that.
Oh, heavens, no.
Good.
I'm just here to call your attention to an article in Haaretz that came out, I think, recently. Apparently on Tuesday, the World Jewish Congress approved a resolution that calls on countries around the world, quote, particularly those whose Jewish populations were decimated in the Shoah, to outlaw public denial of the Holocaust, and so on and so forth. Now, years ago, I saw similar activity going on, talking about 15, 20 years ago, with the OSCE, with the ODIHR. These are all UN nations.
Yes.
Or UN departments.
Yes.
And I saw this publication called A Report to Congress. It was the new anti-Semitism. And I read that, and I looked at it, and I said, hell, this is crazy. But now today I see that they just passed a resolution in Australia.
Yes.
Basically acknowledging what they call the London Declaration. Is that it?
Yeah, and basically what they're trying to do is they're aware that modern science and technology has caught up with the propaganda which was used to justify stealing Israel from the Palestinians and handing it to these descendants of Central Asian Khazars.
I mean, but Michael, it's so obviously over the rainbow. I mean, they've lost their cockles. I mean, they've gone nuts in my humble opinion.
They have, and it's more than just this scream to criminalize Holocaust denial around the world. First of all, everybody's looking at that and saying this makes it obvious they're trying to hide something. Okay, because people who see Bigfoot don't have their careers ruined. People who claim to take a ride in a UFO, they aren't thrown in prison. But in this area, and it is so, so contradictory to the First Amendment, freedom of expression and inquiry and thought, to just have these kind of laws, it's very obvious. They're scared. This lie is collapsing. And over and above this call for criminalizing questioning of the Orthodox account of the Holocaust, now they're trying to say that anybody who doubts the official story of the Holocaust is mentally ill and needs treatment. And it's not just the Holocaust. Obama's administration has now come out saying anybody doubting the dogma of global warming, they're crazy. They need mental treatment. Now they're talking about 9/11 denial.
Michael, I looked at the State Department phone book, which is available on the Internet.
Yes.
Just Google. And did you know we have a Holocaust department in the State Department?
I'm not surprised. I am absolutely not surprised.
Just all you gotta do is punch it in, and there it is.
Well, I'm not even interested in finding that here. Listen, Danny, let me let you go here because I got about 6 minutes to go here. I got to close out some stuff here for before Claire gets up here at the top of the show. And I just want to explain something. Everybody says, well, you know, why? If the Holocaust did not really happen as Hollywood has shown it to us, why did they even bother? And the reason is very simple. At the end of World War II, the Zionists wanted to simply take Palestine for their own, away from the Palestinian people. But the entire world had just united against Germany on the principle that one people do not have a right to simply march into another people's home and take it for their own. It was wrong for Hitler to do that to Poland. It was wrong for Hitler to do that to France, to Austria, to all the other countries. And everybody said, yes, it's wrong when this gets done. And the Zionists needed a propaganda device so powerful that all the nations that sacrificed blood and treasure to tell Germany they could not just steal Poland for their own use would turn around and say, well, I guess we have to let the Zionists steal Palestine. And that was when slave labor camps were rebranded as extermination centers, delousing became gassing, and this whole horror story was cranked up and spoon-fed to you non-stop. So that we, the people of the world, who had justly condemned Germany for stealing other people's lands, would turn around and say, oh, it's okay for the Zionists to do it to Palestine. That was the reason for this huge propaganda campaign. And now it's starting to fall apart. This is the reason why Israel and their minions around the world will just slam down on anybody questioning this story. Because if it is exposed as a gigantic propaganda hoax, and it already is, let's be honest, then Israel's entire justification for displacing the Palestinian people just evaporates. And they're out there screaming, oh, the Bible says we have a divine right to these lands. Actually, the Bible says that the descendants of the 12 tribes that followed Moses out of Egypt have a claim to that land, although God later on took it away because they were sinners. The Bible doesn't mention anything about the descendants of converted Khazars in Central Asia having any claim to that land. And so it's just grown into this huge thing, and Israel basically has this attitude that the world still operates the way it did back during the days of the Old Testament. And they've gone in and taken land that belongs to other people, and it's not really theirs, and they've tried to rewrite history. They've been caught faking the archaeology to try and cement their claim to the land. And it's all a gigantic propaganda fraud. And over time, it's gotten more and more extreme, and it's starting to fall apart. Even the plaque at the front of Auschwitz had to revise downward by 2.5 million the total number of people who died of all causes in Auschwitz, including the typhus epidemics. Now we know that big crematorium at Auschwitz that we were all told the Germans built it to conceal the bodies and everything was actually built after the war was over by the Russians to deal with the typhus epidemic. We know that the soap really wasn't made from humans. The lampshades were made of goat skin. Science has caught up with it. Time makes ancient truth uncouth. And this is why they're panicking and they're trying to pass laws saying that you can't even ask a question about the Holocaust without being thrown in jail. Why we have these very obvious pro-Israel shills calling the show and screaming, oh, you're a bunch of Jew haters. It's all coming apart on them. And they don't know what to do. All right, going to grab a couple quick phone calls here. Peter in Nevada. Aloha. Peter, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, it's Los Angeles. But listen,
okay.
I just wanted to chime in on one thing with the...
Nevada's a nice state. You might want to think about moving.
I am thinking about it. But Michael, you're talking about attacking a guy in a wheelchair. I want to remind the audience that back in the 80s, there was a terrorist incident where terrorists hijacked the Achille Lauro, remember? And an older, elderly Jewish gentleman named Leon Klinghoffer in a wheelchair was thrown overboard by this terrorist, and the terrorist was a guy named Abu Nidal.
Who turned out to be working for Mossad.
And he turned out to be working. He was a Mossad agent. It was all a Mossad operation, and they're killing their own people in order to make points, just as they did with the Entebbe thing and Lavon affair and everything else. These people will stop at nothing, and who's the anti-Semite people? The people throwing, an elderly Jewish guy off a boat in a wheelchair? That was the Mossad. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, the Mossad is called a false flag. And remember, the motto of the Mossad, by way of deception thou shalt conquer. Their entire philosophy is to fool you and trick you into going along with whatever they want. Peter was commenting on a story. British intelligence finally released documentation a few years ago that proved Israel itself set up the hijacking that led to the raid on Entebbe. The agenda to make Palestinians look bad to the entire world so the world would go on thinking it's okay for the Zionists to steal Palestinian land. And they've been playing this game for 60 years, and it's worn out. And that's why they're panicking over Stephen Hawking. That's why they're calling this show and screaming Jew hater. That's why they're trying to get laws passed around the world that nobody can dare question the propaganda without being thrown in jail. Why they're even trying to say that anybody who questions the Holocaust, they're mentally ill. You've got to lock them up. They're panicking. You can smell the panic in the air. Got to take a break for commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And one of the listeners just sent me the link to the U.S. Department of State's Office of Holocaust Issues. In other words, the U.S. government is spending your tax money to promote the Orthodox official version of the Holocaust onto you and your children. You will believe what we tell you to believe. You will not question. Blah, 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 blah. Now, one more thing before we go back to the phones here. This idea of trying to criminalize asking questions about what happened in World War II is about as un-American as you can get. The whole purpose of the First Amendment, right to freedom of speech, is so that two parties can get up and have a discussion. And this guy over here can say, chocolate ice cream is the best, and here are the reasons why. And the other guy can say, no, pistachio ice cream is better, and here are the reasons why. And you go back and forth, and people decide for themselves who are listening to the debate. That's what freedom of speech and expression is supposed to be about. When you have somebody passing a law saying that you will not question whether pistachio ice cream is the best in the world, it's because they know that in a real debate between chocolate and pistachio, pistachio isn't going to win that argument. And this push to criminalize Holocaust questioning around the world is basically an admission that they understand it will not survive a careful examination of the claims. Truth needs no law to support it. Truth is unafraid of questioning. Truth survives re-examination. Throughout history, from Galileo to Zundel, only lies and liars have resorted to the courts to enforce adherence to official revealed dogma. We're going to go back to the phones here. Jim in Georgia. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. This is a bill that's in the House or the Senate. I'm not sure. It's about working overtime and getting credit for the hours, not getting paid, and take the time off later. I've done that, and I got screwed out of 219 hours years ago, okay? But anybody that does that, I had another friend of mine that worked, and the company went bankrupt, and he got screwed. So people, do not work off the clock. Do not take the credit for the hours. Get the overtime, the time and a half, because that's what the Republicans want to pass right now in the Senate or the House. I'm not sure. What I'm glad about is Obama is against it, and he's going to veto it, so...
Well, that's a good thing. I mean, he's still playing politics, especially with this Benghazi situation unraveling. As bad as it is, he's going to need to make some points with the American people. Because now it's apparently come out the White House was involved in changing and editing all of the testimony that's been offered by these so-called independent witnesses. So, remember what Richard Nixon said about Watergate? It wasn't the break-in that was the problem, it was the cover-up. And now they got proof of a cover-up. So this thing is getting legs, and the corporate media is having to pay attention to it. And I imagine Obama is going to look for any opportunity he can ingratiate himself to the American people, and we should milk that for anything we can get from him. But, you know...
Michael, Jerusalem would love to take the whole Mediterranean shoreline all the way up as far as they possibly could.
Oh, they're already doing it. They're redrawing the maps to say they've got all of Lebanon's gas fields and everything. We'll be right back after station identification with the America. Welcome back to the show. And for those of you on Justin TV, this gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who always joins us every Friday in our third hour. And before we go to Claire's talking points, I was going out during the break over to YouTube to find that video from Democracy Underground where they're interviewing this Israeli member of the Knesset who is just out there saying, yeah, we scream anti-Semitism as a trick. It's a trick to shut people up. When we know we can't win the argument and debate with them, we scream anti-Semite, they shut up and go away. And I found that apparently several of the accounts that had that video have now been shut down.
Imagine my shot.
Imagine my shot. And so I relinked to one of the few that are still there, and my guess is it'll probably be gone by nightfall. It's okay. I've made a local copy of that video. But like I said, we're seeing a fear reaction. The matrix is collapsing around us. Now, Claire, what do you want to talk about first?
Well, I do want to get to Syria, but there are a couple of things, very current developments that I think we need to take a look at.
Okay.
U.S. military units have been put on alert as security deteriorates in the Libyan capital.
Yes.
Translation, we're going to go in and reinvade, folks.
That's right. The Libyan people do not like their brand-new U.S.-approved puppet regime, and they certainly do not like their brand-new private central bank that was given to them when their state bank and gold dinar was taken away from them, because if you have a gold dinar and a state bank, the terrorists are going to win. And, yeah, it's basically Libya has been deteriorating. Apparently the police station at Benghazi was shot up again.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything left of it standing? It's been bombed 3 times and shot up 6 times.
I don't know.
And, yeah, so you're right. The U.S. government needs to find a way to go in and reinvade and this time kill all the Libyans and say, all right, now it's pacified and there's a U.S.-approved regime. We've got the oil to sell for dollars only, blah, 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 blah. This World War III is not going very well for the country that started it. And by the way, that's also the historical trend, because since the dawn of the industrial age, every major war was ultimately lost by the country that started it.
Right.
So.
And speaking of the war on terror and the cost to the economy, I'd like to add a little bit to what you said when President Obama declared that the economy is poised for progress.
Yes.
I don't know how this man can say these lines with a straight face, because
he's probably on SSRIs.
Because under Obama's watch, now we have 20% of America's kids are living in poverty, and 15% of Americans are living on food stamps. How can?
No, wait a minute. We've got 50 million Americans. Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. I mean, how can this man say that with a straight face? It amazes me, Michael.
Well, like I said, he's probably on antidepressants. And as a matter of fact, when we were asking this question about SSRIs, and 10% of the American people are on these very dangerous drugs that distort your decision-making ability, it's just by statistics, 10% of the government has to be on these and probably more.
Yeah.
And the reality is that we found a report from Obama's first term where they said he was dealing with depression. So he's probably on some kind of medication right now. And for the guy who's got the keys to that nuclear arsenal, that's a really scary kind of a concept.
That is very scary.
We're coming to the end of the segment here, and we're going to take a break for some commercials. And then we'll come on back and talk more about this. But Obama is lying to us again. They've been saying poised for progress, green shoots, light at the end of the tunnel for 10 years now, and the economy is still going down. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with the lovely Lady Claire, and we're getting back to the topic of Syria.
Yes. There was a very interesting clarification through Reuters today. And that was that Russia has no plans to sell Syria their advanced defense system, the S-300.
Oh, Israel was saying that Russia was going to do it. You're not telling us that Israel was lying, are you? You anti-Semite Jew.
I think that might be a terminological inexactitude on the part of the Israeli press machine. But apparently, Itar Tass quoted Foreign Minister Lavrov as saying that Russia's going to conclude the contracts they have already fulfilled, but these do not include the S-300 system.
Well, there are a lot of other systems that were contracted for, and Russia has every right to deliver on those contracts, and Syria has every right to the weapons that they are buying. Certainly following these unprovoked attacks by Israel on Syria, I think Russia, which understands the real goal is to get into Syria and Iran, which threatens Russia's strategic interests, they're not going to be quite as pliant in terms of limiting weapons sales to Syria and Iran as they were, say, back in, what was it, 2007?
Yeah.
When the Security Council said, please don't give Syria rockets with which they can shoot down invading Israeli warplanes, because really those Israeli warplanes are precious and expensive, and those are nice Jewish boys in those cockpits, and Syria should not be allowed to shoot them down no matter how much bombing they're doing. Russia, I don't think, is going to go along with that any longer.
And there are still cries in the U.S., various corporate media entities, et cetera, that are urging the U.S. to intervene militarily. And one of the developments we're seeing is that Syrian army rebels are defecting to the Islamist group Jabhat al-Nusra. I mean, I'm laughing. It's not funny, but it's ironic. Because
it is funny because this is actually the worst possible nightmare for the United States government. For 2 years, they have been funding this supposed popular uprising of hired mercenaries, and they wanted to basically get a pliant pro-U.S. government in to replace Assad, and now the political forces within all these hired mercenary factions is shifting to radical Islam, which means moving forward, even if they get rid of Assad, you're going to wind up with a Syria that hates the U.S. even more than Assad did.
Yes, virulently anti-American.
And that's why they're now saying it's got to be a direct military intervention, so the U.S. is going to go in and kill Assad and his forces and all of those Islamic radicals who were on the U.S. payroll, just scrape it out clean and say, okay, pro-U.S. government, private central bank, oil, Syria's oil for dollars only, and everybody goes home happy.
But here's the deal. I mean, Kerry was recently in Moscow this last week. Putin and Lavrov kept him waiting for like 3 hours.
Yes.
And but at the end of the day, they were going to look at developing some sort of dialogue between the rebels and the Syrian government. Well, the rebels have already rejected this.
Well,
not going to happen,
That
right?
was all face-saving by Kerry, because Kerry was going in there with the objective of convincing Russia to stay uninvolved as the U.S. went into Syria, and Putin basically built a brick wall in front of the war machine. Putin told Kerry what Lavrov had told Hillary Clinton, which is, if you go into Syria and or Iran, we will turn it into the new Vietnam, and we will just wear the United States down in a war of attrition which you cannot win.
Right.
And so Putin delivered a very firm no to John Kerry, and Kerry comes out and says, we've agreed to seek peace, which is Kerry's way of trying to save face, because, you know, he basically, his true mission just cratered.
And what is so ironic is that this is the same Al-Qaeda that the United States government is the mortal enemy of, and it's now within spitting distance, maybe, of taking over the country.
And the U.S. has been arming these Al-Qaeda. Israel is evacuating wounded Al-Qaeda, taking them to Israel, putting them in the hospital, patching them up. They're the enemies when we need them to be the enemy, and they're the good guys when we need them. And it's just flipping back and forth. Same thing in Libya. Gaddafi's government was brought down supposedly by Al-Qaeda, although we know videos surfaced showing uniformed American forces on the ground while Gaddafi, there while Gaddafi was being killed.
I mean, my head hurts trying to get around this. I mean, it's the worst possible scenario for the U.S. government right now.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
They have not handled this at all well. And if this Benghazi thing does blow up, we're going to see basically Washington, D.C. in a state of political paralysis.
Yep.
And that, of course, in turn is going to basically start encouraging the other provinces to start breaking away. We're going to take a quick phone call here. Ron in Fort Worth. Aloha, Ron. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Ron, are you there?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. You had a question. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Sounds like a Sprint commercial, doesn't it?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Hey, I've got a stupid question for you. I heard something yesterday as I was passing through, listening to something, or somebody had told me something. Did you hear anything about a 93-7 vote from the Senate on some kind of deal where they were talking about declaring war on the United States?
No, I heard nothing at all about that. Heard nothing at all about that.
Yeah, they were trying to say something about it was...
Well, I think somebody may be paraphrasing. We know the federal government is sort of entering into a state of war against the 50 states. They wouldn't declare it that way. Probably they're talking about some, remember they were trying to update the authorization for the use of military force from back in 2001.
Yeah.
And that was being modified to expand its scope and powers, and it could be basically viewed as war against the U.S., but I've heard nothing about an actual Senate vote saying we're going to declare war on the U.S., because that, of course, would make the federal government look like the bad guys in the court of world opinion. Mm-hmm. Thank you for the call. We're going to let you go here, and I think we are going to go ahead and take Shane in North Carolina just rather than keep him holding until the end of Claire. Shane, are you there?
Yeah, how's it going?
It's going fine. Do you have a question?
Actually, yeah, I just kind of had a quick comment since the Holocaust subject had come up a little bit earlier, and just a little observation that I've made is that, well, for one, I woke up, right around 06 when I started really looking into 9/11. It led me down the rabbit hole, and that's the Holocaust is actually a subject that I was even almost refused to go down that rabbit trail. But basically, the quick comment I wanted to make is, I feel like there's almost like a false paradigm concerning that, kind of like the right-left paradigm with politics. Mm-hmm. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like there's a, either you have to believe like Hitler was some kind of hero, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Or it's like one side was all good or one side was all bad. It's just kind of...
No, both sides were equally bad. Both sides, Dresden, the starvation of the German POWs to death, both sides were bad. War is a very evil thing here, and, I don't want to get into the fine points about the Holocaust except to remind everybody of one thing. Knowing how you were lied to about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, prudence demands that we go back and re-examine absolutely everything we've ever been taught by the state-controlled public schools or by Hollywood or by the corporate TV news and look at it again with fresh eyes. And, of course, that is what they're so terrified of. That's why they're screaming about criminalizing, questioning the Holocaust, declaring Holocaust, questioning a mental illness. They're absolutely terrified people are going to try and decide for themselves what actually happened. That can't be allowed to exist. We have to keep the people believing as they're told to believe, or the whole scam starts coming apart. Okay?
Right. Absolutely.
All right. Thanks a lot, Shane. We're going to let you go. And Claire, what do you have next?
Well, I'd like to follow with Shane's comment with something that I think we all need to understand. Any ethnic cleansing is bad and wrong, no matter where or when it was done.
Yes.
It's bad. What is happening to the Rohingya Muslims right now in Myanmar or Burma, I mean, these people are literally getting killed, basically for their ethnicity.
Well, same thing with the Palestinians. Yeah. I mean, Israel just announced 300 new settlements in the West Bank.
Yep.
That's just the full court push to erase what's left of Palestine off of the map here.
Yep.
And I think one of the reasons why people get so upset over this issue of the Holocaust, because whatever it is that happened back then, happened before most of us were born.
Yes.
I'm 60, soon to be 61, and all of that stuff happened long before I was alive.
Right.
And yet, every time we question Israel on their aggressions and brutality, we always get, it's okay for Israel to do this to the Palestinians because of what the Nazis did to the Jews. No, it isn't.
No, it's not.
Both of them were wrong.
Yeah.
They were both wrong. And if it was wrong for Germany to unfairly demonize the Jews, it is wrong for the United States to unfairly demonize the Muslims.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd kind of like to get back to the subject of Syria and a comment made by General Ray Odierno, the Army Chief of Staff. And what he is saying is that if the Obama administration does want to do some sort of overt military action it has to be quickly by the end of the summer. And he's saying that the sequestration is causing limitations on training.
Well, he's just out to protect his budget. We need money to go kill people. Forget about educating our children and taking care of the elderly and even taking care of the wounded veterans. We got to go out and kill more people. Give me money.
And he's also saying he praised the FSA rebels, the majority of whom, as we have mentioned previously, had pledged their allegiance and are being led by Al-Qaeda terrorists. And it was not a matter of if, but when they claimed victory. I don't understand.
It's a Charlie Foxtrot.
Yeah.
They're just there's no other way. They've lost control of their covert overthrow, and that's why they're pushing for direct military intervention.
Yeah.
And I think, given the realities on the ground there, if they don't move quickly, Assad is making gains.
Yes.
And that whole FSA could be gone within a matter of weeks. Even with all the new weapons being given to them. We got to take a break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I understand that Claire wants to talk about the drone strikes. And before I do that, I want to mention, I don't know if you pay a lot of attention to the toy stores, but the toy stores are starting to sell little tiny drone models for the little kiddies to play with, so that drones sort of become part of everyday life. And, oh, look, I'm a drone pilot.
The new normal.
The new normal. I'm surprised there hasn't been an Xbox game based on being a drone pilot and just blowing people. There probably is one. I don't play electronic games other than Flight Simulator, so I don't really know what's out there in the marketplace. Your talk about your take rather on the drones.
I find this practice of this remote control extrajudicial assassination horrendous. We not only get the alleged bad guy, we don't even know because there's no due process, but we're also taking out children, wives, the medically fragile elderly, and the fact that President Obama has embraced the drone strike as extrajudicial assassinations of people we don't like says a great deal about his character, Mike.
Well, let me step back here a little bit. We now know that even during the Bush administration, the administration knew most of the people in Guantanamo were innocent of any wrongdoing, but they kept them there rather than have to deal with the embarrassment of, hey, we got some innocent people and waterboarded them.
Right.
So, if the vast majority of people inside Guantanamo are actually innocent of any wrongdoing, we may extend that or extrapolate that to presume that the vast majority of people targeted in the drone strikes are also innocent of any wrongdoing. That list of names is built just by offering rewards for people to turn over names of suspected terrorists.
Snitches. Yep.
And they may name names just to get the money. They may be naming the name of the guy who's been dating the girl they want to date just to get rid of him.
Yep.
And so we don't really know. And every time a drone takes out one of the people on that list who may not be guilty of any wrongdoing, they will take out an average of 50 people, innocent bystanders, around that at the same time. This is an act of terror.
Yes.
Certainly far more death and destruction than happened in Boston. But the corporate media seems to be okay with this. What Obama is really doing here is exactly what Adolf Hitler did with the V-1 buzz bomb, which was the world's first cruise missile, and the V-2, which was the world's first guided ballistic missile. Simply sending in these random explosions into an enemy country to convince the people to tell their government to capitulate to the imperial power. Now, it didn't work in Great Britain. The V-1 and V-2 hardened the British resolve against Nazi Germany.
Yes.
If Hitler hadn't done that, he might have actually prevailed against Churchill. And so why Obama thinks it's going to work here really doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's what it is. It's a terror campaign. Now we know, of course, the High Court in Pakistan has said these drone strikes by the United States into Pakistan, which is, I should point out, a nation we are not actually at war with, is a violation of international law, and they've ordered the Pakistan government to refer this to the International War Crimes Tribunal. Now, the U.S. is just going to ignore whatever the tribunal says, but in the court of world opinion, it's just a reminder that the United States isn't the good guy.
No.
The United States is the aggressor here.
And there is another development in Pakistan.
Yes.
One of the candidates for the presidency of Pakistan, Imran Khan, has stated and promised to the people of Pakistan that if there is one more drone strike against the Pakistani people, he will order the Pakistani Air Force to shoot it down.
Well, didn't he get knocked off the podium a few days ago and suffer a major?
He had an accident.
Yeah, just accident. He's ahead in the polls. He was ahead in the polls. By the way, apparently during the actual election, all of a sudden, amazing thing, this guy was ahead in the polls, and now he's trailing behind. Gosh darn, I wonder how that could happen.
But he did an interview that was picked up electronically from his hospital room, and said, please go to the polls. Anything can happen if you're willing to work for change and work with me. So, I would like to hope that this guy gets a fair shot.
Well, I don't know. They may be using Diebold over there. And remember the motto of the Diebold Election Systems Company, we guarantee the results.
Absolutely.
All righty. Do you have anything else?
I think that was it.
That was it here. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. We have, we lost Larry, so let's pick up Steve in Tampa. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, lovely lady Clara and Mikey. Hey, Mike, the reason I'm calling is that I don't know if you can remember back when you first realized that you did not live in the country that you thought you did.
Oh, yeah.
And how that made you feel.
Yes.
Maybe Claire can say that, but it's a really kind of a painful thing to realize, how could I have been so stupid? Why didn't I see this? And you consider yourself an intelligent person, but wait a minute, just like a programming, now maybe you could have people like a support group for ignorant people, but they call in and say, oh yeah, people that are on the fence, hey, something's not right here, and they're thinking, oh, well, if they hear somebody else's story, well, they don't feel so stupid. But boy, it is sort of you just feel so stupid. Why didn't you see this before?
But the good thing is, when you do wake up, you become liberated.
Yeah. We have to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Steve, and we'll be right back. And aloha. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go to the phones here. John I'm not sure where you're calling from. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. It's John in Idaho.
Yes.
And, first off, I wanted to thank you and Claire. Both of you guys have been listening for, almost a couple of years now, I think. And real quick, I wanted to relate to the caller about the support group because, I kind of found you guys via Ryan Dawson.
Yes.
Watching War by Deception a couple of years ago, and I felt the same way. I just felt like, oh my gosh, I had no clue, but I jumped into the rabbit hole and I tried to find good sources, and stay away from the wackos, and I've found a few, but anyway, I called I was listening to you talk about the drone strikes, and I've seen sources, and I'm wondering, what you know about where they're really concentrating on these, and what's the motive behind these strikes. And it isn't to take out terrorists. From what I've seen you can find maps of the drone strikes. And what are they? Is it corporate interests that they're concentrating on? Is it the heroin, the Silk Road there?
No, I really do think it's a campaign of terror against these countries to get the people to basically compel their leadership to capitulate to whatever the U.S. demands are. More than that, it is a forced demonstration. And every time Obama sends another one of these drones into a country that we're not even at war with and murders a whole bunch of people, he's sending a message to the government of every other nation on earth, we can do the same to you if you don't go along with us. And I think that's the reason they continue these drone strikes, even in the face of global condemnation and even condemnation among the American people.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, and I understand that, but I really think there's other motives involved in it too.
I'm sure there are overlapping motives. There's never one motive for any of these actions. It's always a confluence of different interests. Certainly the drone salesmen want to see these things going on. The military agenda, the economic agenda, and again the strategic agenda.
Cool. Well, there again, I really wanted to say thank you. I really appreciate your show, and Claire, and you guys do a great job on the website. I listen to you pretty much every day, and I did want to tell you I found a way to listen to you on my Android.
Oh, good.
And tell the listeners that via the TuneIn Radio app, if you download that app, you can listen to RBN. There's an RBN on there. and I could listen to you live on my Android now again. Finally, you know, it says they got rid of Flash Player on Android, and there was no way for me to listen to you live besides downloading the MP3 at night, you know, or after.
Could you email that to me so I can add it to our little radio website, wrhradio.com, so that people know that that's out there, and make sure that they have that option? Because I know a lot of the venues that we used to be on are no longer carrying it. Again, the apps have simply gone out of business and they're not available, and we're always looking for new ways to reach people. We know we're the darling of the Part 15 radio transmitters all across America. We can't even tell how big our audience is because a single feed off of our streaming server can go out to somebody who's running a Part 15 radio station, and it can go out to hundreds of people from there. So we know we're getting out there, and we just need to reach a few more people.
Great. Yeah, I'll do that. Thanks again, Mike, and aloha.
Aloha. All right, we're starting to get here to the end of the show. We talked a little bit earlier about the fact that J.P. Morgan has sort of decided they're going to fill the corruption vacuum left behind by the collapse of Enron. Now, remember, Enron, and there's a wonderful documentary out about it called The Smartest Guys in the Room. It was on HBO. You can order the DVD. I don't know if it's available online, but it's definitely, if you are starting to build a collection of DVDs with which to educate your friends, Smartest Guys in the Room is one you've got to have. And it just talks about how Enron just literally corrupted its way to wealth and power. They were allowed to use mark-to-market accounting, which is valuing the assets at whatever they decide they're going to be, and used those highly overinflated assets to post record profits and gains, and people started buying their stock, and it was just going up and up and up. And then they got into that power thing out in California, where they bought control of electric providers within California, then started artificially creating shortages in order to raise the electric rates, and they looted California for about $8 billion. And then, of course, it all collapsed, and Ken Lay, supposedly just before he was going to be arrested, died, and his body was cremated, and that's supposed to be the end of him. Skilling, I think, has made a deal. He's going to get out of prison early. And all the employees and stockholders and customers basically got screwed in the whole situation. Well, with Enron gone, now it's come out J.P. Morgan got into the same business, took over some failing power stations and started gaming the system to raise rates. And now apparently the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is investigating and is looking to impose penalties because J.P. Morgan was playing the same Enron game. Meanwhile, out in California, their Attorney General is suing J.P. Morgan over the fraudulent and unlawful debt collection practices. So the foreclosure settlement that Obama reached with the state's attorneys generals appears to be unraveling because now prosecutions are beginning. This is a criminal, not civil prosecution here. Where you've got some callers waiting on the line, Larry in Oregon. Aloha, Larry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Back to the Holocaust. That is a weapon, Michael. That has been, it's a psychological weapon.
That's exactly right.
Movie stars and people like that to make it politically incorrect to deny the Holocaust. And then so when somebody says it, then you're attacked. If you're called anti-Semitic because you deny the Holocaust, it's not that you're prejudiced or that you're not politically correct. It's the fact that you're being hit with a weapon.
You are, and I wrote an article at my website called The New McCarthyism because what we're seeing right here and now is basically a replay of what we saw post-World War II with the House Committee on Un-American Activities, only back then the word was communist. He's a communist, he's a commie sympathizer, and careers were ruined. Because, all the people in Hollywood had gone along with the war agenda during World War II, movies that glorified war, demonized the Germans and the Japanese, and then it was all over, and they wanted a peace dividend, and all of a sudden they're being told, now you got to demonize the Russians. And Hollywood was saying, why do we have to do that? They were our allies in this last war. No, we're going to have a new Cold War with which to go on looting the American taxpayer to build all these weapons. And the good news is, because it's a Cold War, the weapons will never actually be used, and so who cares if they really work or not? It's just all about the money. And there was a group in Hollywood that had sufficient moral character to stand up and say, I don't think I want to go along with that. And, of course, those were the people who were targeted as communist sympathizers and driven out of their careers. Well, we're seeing the same thing again today, the same exact tactic, only instead of communist, they scream anti-Semite. And, by the way, I don't want to use the phrase Holocaust denial. I want to use Holocaust questioning. Nobody's denying bad things happened in World War II. Bad things happen in every war. But we are questioning some of the aspects of the story, given the obvious problems with that story and the many aspects of the story that have already been completely discredited. It is reasonable to ask a question. And why they're criminalizing the asking of questions is simply a flashing neon sign. They got something to hide. But you're right. They use it as a weapon. We just put up that video from Democracy Now! Where that member of the Knesset is saying, yeah, it's a trick. We scream anti-Semite to get people to shut up. And like I said, it goes all the way back to that analogy between the chocolate ice cream lover and the pistachio ice cream lover. So the First Amendment right to expression is the guy who likes chocolate gets to say his piece, and the guy who likes pistachio gets to say his piece. And if the pistachio manufacturers get a law passed saying you cannot question or demonize or challenge the idea that pistachio is the best ice cream on earth, then you know they're basically admitting they can't win a fair and honest debate, and the same thing applies to the Holocaust.
And I could listen to Claire twice a week.
I listen to her every single day.
Yeah, but I mean, on the air, her report is really super. And you two guys, when you bring out a point, it's working together, sometimes it's a little more fun. It's, it gives you a little variation.
Well,
But,
we've talked about it, but the fact is that Claire has something else that she likes to do with her time. She is, of course, a composer. She's written all of this wonderful music. We have 2 more pieces that are getting ready to record and produce videos on, and that really is her first love, is the music, and I'm her roadie, and I take a very great deal of pride in it. I'm her sound engineer, and...
do you have a music arranger, one that plays all the different instruments and a sequencer and that sort of thing?
Yeah. Claire, in fact, when we first got married, almost 20 years ago, it'll be our 20th anniversary in December, my wedding gift to her was a rack full of synthesizers because I've been kind of playing around with that stuff. And Claire has, over the years, wrapped her arms around the technology, and she's got a fairly decent setup right now. But what she likes to write is vocal music, and one of the downsides of living here in Hawaii is it's hard to find really good singers, and that's why I've become such a very good sound engineer over the last 5 years.
Well, one of the things you can do today is have them record, send them a file on the computer and have them record against whatever she's written on her sequencer.
Oh, we do that. Some of the more recent demos, we're using singers in Great Britain.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to hear that because it's a wonderful thing to do, and thanks for taking my call.
You got it. Thanks an awful lot here. We're going to let Larry go here. Before we take the next phone call, breaking story, the Internal Revenue Service has come out and apologized for unfairly targeting the taxes of the Occupy movement. Yes, you caught us. We're using the tax laws for political repression. We promise we won't do it again. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. Back to the phones. Robert in Missouri. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, a couple points, Mike. I was listening to the last caller talk about the Holocaust, and then, a good one I've been using lately with folks that want to just focus in on this one Holocaust in Germany is the Russian Holocaust under the communists, where they killed 10 times as many people.
Yeah.
And most of the people in charge of that country were the very people that got Holocausted in Germany. So that's what I refute people with on that one.
Well, there have been a lot of genocides, that were just as horrible as the official story of the Holocaust, Cambodia, Soviet Union under Stalin. But from the point of view of Hollywood, the only crimes we ever talk about are the Germans committed against the Jews, and everything else is kind of a secondary issue, B picture if it gets made at all. And, it's just this monomaniacal focus on this one event, which is used for political purposes to justify Israel's modern aggressions against its neighbors. And this constant flow of money from the American taxpayer. We have all been forced to give Israel more than 4 times the entire cost of the Apollo moon program. And we are not getting a giant leap for mankind out of all of that money. Now, if you believe the official story of World War II, we, the people of the United States of America, sacrificed much treasure and much blood to go into Germany and stop Hitler from completing whatever it is he was planning on doing. And so you would think Israel would be sending us money in reparations, that Israel would be grateful for what we did, but they aren't. Israel doesn't act like they have anything to be grateful for. And that right there tells you it's all a hoax and a piece of propaganda. Israel doesn't act like they have anything to thank the United States for coming out of World War II. They want more money, what did you, that was last week. Give us something. Give us an Iron Dome this week. Give us an F-35 this week. We probably ought to.
No, they gave us some good payback. The Liberty and the 9/11. They hooked us up. We got our payback. But anyway, I want to talk about Pakistan. I think they want to destabilize Pakistan. And I was just rereading up on the assassination of Benazir Bhutto and the Mossad ties to that. And I think they want to get that Islamic bomb. I don't think they like that Islamic bomb sitting there in Pakistan.
No, they absolutely do not.
Yeah, I think the Israelis want to have a monopoly on nuclear force in the region. And
it's not force. It's not nuclear force. They want a monopoly on nuclear sales. That's what they're using the Non-Proliferation Treaty for. All these other nuclear countries signed this treaty saying we will not sell bombs. Israel's out there selling bombs like there's no tomorrow. They got caught trying to sell one to South Africa. There's reason to suspect they sold North Korea their first nuclear warhead. It's market exclusivity. It's like the way they run the diamond trade. Nobody's got the nuclear diamonds but us. It's all about profitability.
Well, but I think kind of like this, I'm talking like in the geographical region about ability to strike Israel, any of the Islamic countries. They want to keep that out of their hands, of course. What do you think of that?
Well, I don't think any of those Islamic countries are going to strike Israel because Israel is the world's 5th or 6th most powerful nuclear-armed state. What Israel wants to protect is their option to invade the other countries without fear of a nuclear retaliation. Israel's not afraid anybody's going to invade them. What they want is to always have the ability to invade other countries with impunity. That's why they're screaming at Russia not to sell the S-300 to Syria. They want to have the right to go over Syria and drop bombs on chicken ranches and not have their planes shot down.
Yeah, well, what do you think about this Samson option to where these guys have basically threatened all the capitals in Europe saying, if things go bad for us, we're just going to obliterate all your capital cities. I mean, can any other country in the world get away with saying something like that?
Well, they're following basically what's called Israel's mad dog policy, and the mad dog policy has worked. The world sees Israel as a mad dog, and Israel may be in a position to carry that threat out. We know there is an unaccounted for radioactivity around the Israeli consulate in New York City. It was detected when the the nuclear emergency search team was making baseline maps over New York to make it easy to spot a newly introduced radioactive source. And they saw this radiation coming out of the New York Israeli consulate. Israel will not allow anybody in to inspect. So I think quite possibly Israel has a nuclear weapon already hidden there with which to blackmail the United States. You need to remember, Israel got their first fissionables from the United States of America, from an outright materials theft from the Savannah River plant, and there was this other organization called NUMEC, which was an Israeli-owned nuclear materials reprocessing plant. They had a huge shortfall of weapons-grade material. It was a huge, huge scandal. So if Israel got the core material for bombs here in the United States of America, all they have to do is leave some of it behind and build a bomb around it, and not have to worry about smuggling the bomb out and smuggling the bomb back in. And so I would say it is a high probability Israel has 2 or 3 nuclear weapons hidden inside the United States of America.
Wow. Yeah, well, that's alarming. There's a lot of chatter out there about nukes being planted around the country, and then the whole, DHS roll out, some sort of a false flag.
All right, we got to take a break for I got to let you go. I'm sorry, we got to take a break for commercial. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm watching on the corporate media, and now they're really paying attention to Benghazi because now they've got a cover-up. They've got a cover-up, and all of these American media prostitutes that are all dreaming of being the next Woodward and Bernstein, and they're going to blow the lid off this whole thing. And like Nixon said, it isn't the crime, it's the cover-up that does you in here. And it's a reminder that, as they say, time makes ancient truth uncouth. All of history is a war between rulers who want to decide what the people know and think, and then the people trying to figure out for themselves what's really going on. And as we move into modern technological means of communication, printing press, telegraph, radio, TV, internet, the life expectancy of a government lie gets shorter and shorter and shorter. The donation of Constantine, we've talked about that before, was hundreds of years before it became generally known that was a fraud. When John F. Kennedy was assassinated, it took about 30 years to reach a point where half of America thought the Warren report was a complete joke. These days, the life expectancy of a government lie can be clocked with an egg timer. What is really historically significant about the invasion and conquest of Iraq is the lies used to start that war became known to the majority of the population that they were lies while the war was still being fought, and that's a historic first. Normally the lies used to start a war are not revealed to the public until long after the war is over and long after the war profiteers have gone to their graves happy at all the money they made. These days, it's a completely different environment, and our best hope for the future, of course, is that the people trying to maintain the old lies don't realize how drastically the flow of information has changed in society. And we will not be dragged back to the 1950s and 1960s Cold War mentality where we simply accept at face value whatever the government and the corporate media tells us and obediently wet ourselves when they scream commies at us. It's a completely new reality. There is now a free media in this country. It used to be called the independent media. Before that, the alternative media, negative connotations on those. We are the free media. And we know that out there, the polls are telling us Americans don't trust the government. They don't trust the corporate-owned media. They're starting to ask questions. They're starting to be willing to entertain alternative explanations for the events leading up to the situation we find ourselves in right now. All of us need to make a point of going out there and finding people asking questions and ready to listen. And yes, you're going to run into a bunch of these undercover government Israeli FBI shills who are paid to argue with you endlessly and waste your time and get you frustrated and running in circles. So ignore them. Once you realize they're there, they're very easy to spot. Find the people legitimately asking questions. Why is my kid dead in a military grave? For what did they die? Was it because Muslims hate us for our freedoms? Is there another reason? Yes, it's called the Federal Reserve Note. There's the music. It's Friday. Claire and I have to run on out and help feed some of the hungry on this rock because the money junkies won't do it. We'll be back here Monday on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well. Please support Republic Broadcasting. Check out the store. They got some really cool stuff in there. Please support whatreallyhappened.com. Please take care of yourselves. Be skeptical. Be informed. Make good choices. Aloha, America.